So before I start, I want to just indicate that it's indeed a privilege and an honor to be here today. I enjoy grower seminars. I enjoy your participation, and we'll see how it goes. The second thing I want to say before we start is I appreciate the trust that you have in the programs that we've developed. We're trying to make these better. We're working on Truvera. We're doing everything that we can to improve our ability to control weeds in Sugarbeet. And that includes the collaboration that I have with the Southern Minnesota team. So I don't have to pull my planter down here to do my work. The local team complements us, assists us in that, and that's a big deal. So I really appreciate that. So I'm going to give a talk that has about 6 different sections in it. So a series of short stories that are all about weed control in sugar beets. So I'm going to start by making a bold statement. My favorite herbicide in sugar beets is ethyl, ethofumazate. Ethofumazate, my favorite herbicide. When we get rain to activate ethyl, I think it's a wonderful product. And we've seen growth. We've seen this in all of the cooperatives, the growth of the amount of ethofumazate that we're using. Ethyl is also our most frustrating herbicide, the most frustrating. The reason for that is it has a property. It's called KOC. It loves to be bound to soil. So you spray it, it sticks to soil, and it wants to stay there. And we need rain to break it loose. And I'm not talking about an all-day drizzle. We need a good solid inch of rain to get the ethyl into the soil. So if it doesn't rain, it doesn't do any good. It stays on the soil surface, and it's going to last for about 14 weeks. If you can get it into the soil solution, that area between your soil colloids and the soil, it's about a 5-week product. And our data, including David's Southern Min data, would support that. And we've continued to evaluate that, and we're pretty sure about our recommendations. The challenge we have back to our ability to get it into the soil is if we should incorporate it or not. Okay? So this is from the survey. The same survey that you did before lunch. So what the numbers say is in Southern Min, about 30% of you incorporate it, 30%. About double that in crystal sugar geography. Why? Doesn't rain as much up there. Number 2, they work with kochia, or we have kochia in those geographies, and you got to get the ethyl into the soil right away in the spring. Maybe water hemp's a little more forgiving than kochia. We need to get it right. We need to get it in the ground right away to control kochia. So I'm going to come back to this a little bit later on because I have some information that I think you'll find interesting. We didn't have any problem getting the ethyl activated into the soil in 2024. So you don't need my map to know that you all had plenty of May and June rainfall. But the data, this data from Minnesota DNR indicates or verifies what you already know. We had lots of rain. We had too much rain. And as far as I'm concerned, we had good early season weed control with ethofumazate. It was the challenge of getting the lay-by program activated that caused us some problems. So what am I going to do? I'm going to continue on this ethofumizate theme. I have more to say. And then we're going to jump into some other topics. So I'm going to talk about a herbicide called Gold-Tex. So several of you have mentioned it. I get some emails. Even today, somebody asked about that new herbicide they have in Nebraska. What about us? Why do they have something new? So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about acetochlor and surface water. And that's some information from Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Number 4, Palmer amaranth. We did a Palmer amaranth experiment last year, and I'm going to give you some results that we had from that experiment. Complex mixtures and adjuvant, that part's going to kind of roll together. And then we're going to talk about an experiment that David and I have been working on. We're reevaluating Ronate and Eptam. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a product called Spinaid that we're using in kochia country. Okay, there's a lot of different ethofumizate products, okay? And they're all listed on the screen here. Nortron, Ethatron, ethofumizate 4SC. There's a new one in 2025 called Maxtron from Alba. And I don't know if Nectron is available anywhere, but when I go to the website, the EPA website, Nectron is also listed for weed control in sugar beets. So lots of different products. They're all approved for use in sugar beet. So the question is do they all work? Do they all work the same? So we did an experiment to find out. So we did it in 2 locations up at Moorhead. We also had one in collaboration with David. We had lots of rain on both experiments, both Moorhead and our site just near the Renville facility had plenty of rainfall. The outcome is these ethofumizate products all work the same. They all work the same. So 3 different evaluations, you can see that. You can see the bars. I have confidence that whatever product you buy is going to work like the other one. So make your purchase decisions based on something else. Don't be worried about efficacy on weeds or that. Am I making a mistake?
Well, they want to move your mic so it's not on your coat, and
Okay.
maybe it won't.
Make that rattling sound?
Let's try that.
Okay, that wasn't my stomach either. That was something else. Okay, so no difference in ethofumizate performance at all. Make your purchase decision on relationships, price, whatever you do your business based on. Now, there's only one thing I want to say. So Maxtron is not as concentrated as the other products. So the use rate for Maxtron is going to be a little different. So keep that in mind when you're making applications this year. Mark, that made a big difference. Okay, next topic. Let's talk about that product called Gold-Tex that they're using in Nebraska. Okay? So Gold-Tex is, the common name for it is called metametron. Some people call it metametron. In 2025, what they use out there in Western sugar will be Torero, which will be a combination of Gold-Tex and ethofumizate. So metametron is a photosystems 2 inhibitor herbicide. It's not something new. It's been around a long time. It's a product that can be used incorporated into the soil. It can be left on the surface, or it can be used post-emergence. And generally, it's for small-seeded broadleafs. So have we ever tested it? Absolutely. So the interesting thing about this is Dr. Dexter's last grad student, before the era of Roundup Ready sugar beets, evaluated metametron. So what they did is an evaluation, and they found that they needed to put over 6 pints pre-PPI incorporated to get efficacy. They also, remember the era here. Dr. Dexter was very engaged with the micro-rate program. They also used metametron and then followed that up with 3 sequential post-applications. Both projects, both ways of making application provided outstanding sugar beet safety. Sugar beet safety is not the issue here. The issue is it going to control weeds? And this reminds me a lot, when I was a student back in the 80s, there was a BASF product called Pyramin. And the people at Michigan Sugar always bragged about how good Pyramin worked. It worked in light, low organic matter soils. It didn't work very good in our soils. And unfortunately, I think metametron is similar to that. So I think Aaron's data indicates it's better to incorporate metametron. That stated, we're going to have to use some rates that, quite frankly, are very different from the rate structure they're using out in western Nebraska and Wyoming. So the price point, once they get full approval, I think is going to be a significant barrier to its adoption and use in our markets. So David and I have been working with this. We've got 4 experiments that I'm going to report on. So you can see rates here, Goltex alone or metametron alone. And on the top here, in the top 2 experiments, we use etho at 2 pints in combination with Goltex. And again, we're using Adama's rates here, which are rates that they're intending for in the western United States. These rates are not consistent, what I said with Aaron Carlson's research. So you can see the numbers. Pretty mediocre control, even when you add 2 pints of etho to the mixture. The last year, 2023, we did experiments, and these are both the same experiment, 2 different evaluation timings. And you can see we did barge the rate up a little bit in these experiments, but still, in my opinion, water hemp control that isn't very exciting at all. So, interestingly, I was working on my presentation on Monday, and the guy from Adama called me, and he said, Peters, we want you to do another experiment. We want Minnesota and North Dakota to be part of the Section 3 approval. We need your support. So David, here we go again. We're going to do another experiment. He says, no. Well, David, we're going to do another experiment. But I think what we're going to do this time is incorporate it. We're not going to leave it on the surface. I think I'm going to ask that we incorporate product. So this is what they're doing out west. They're using Goltex, again, metametron by itself. It's a Section 18, so you're familiar with those. It's like how we're using Alta Blazer, the states and various counties where it's approved to use the product. Next topic, the chloroacetamides. So let's start up on the top left. So dimethenamide, we have 1 product, Outlook, okay? Acetochlors, we have a total of 3. So everyone's familiar with Warrant. Inversa is a new product. It's from Corteva, Inversa, and it's an encapsulated acetochlor product just like Warrant is. And then there's a product called Arrest, and I want to come back to that. I'll do that in the next slide. On the right-hand side, lots of different S-metolachlor products. There's also metolachlor products, but I don't want you to be using those. I want you to use these S-metolachlor products. So I think this is an inclusive list. I looked to make sure I wasn't missing anything. I think this is the list of various options that we have as part of the lay-by program. Now, I want to go back to this product called Arrest. So I feel like this was a copy and paste label that they did. So I want you to look at the bullet, the third one down. It says application pre-plant, at planting, and pre-emergence. I do not want anybody to be using it that way in southern Maine. That's just not going to work. Acetochlor is a post-emergence product. It should be used once sugar beets are at the two-leaf stage. That's where we've seen the safety to use that product. So I don't know what they're thinking here. I did talk to them, and they said, well, you know, sometimes it doesn't rain, and maybe, you know, leaving it on the surface. I'm not going to get involved in that kind of situation. That just seems like asking for trouble. A little more on acetochlor. I didn't realize this, but the adoption of acetochlor has increased very rapidly in the last 10 years. And this is across crops. And a lot of this is due to the different combinations that have been developed. And again, this is looking at corn, soybeans, and sugar beets, so everything. From last year's survey, you know that there's a good bit of warrant that's used in sugar beets as well. So the reason why we're talking about this, and it's interesting, Mark, based on what you were talking about, EPA, there's been an indication that acetochlor has been in our surface water. So Corteva and Bayer Crop Sciences are collaborating with EPA and MDA, and they've been evaluating where acetochlor has been found the most active. So it's interesting. It's in the Minnesota River Valley. In many respects, it's south of the Minnesota River, but there's a very significant yellow bubble there. They're calling it Hawk Creek, that encompasses Chippewa, Candido-High County, Renville, and Meekers County. And that's really important. These detections mean that it's been found in surface water at greater than 3.6 part per billion. And I don't know the whole regulatory process on this, but it's certainly something that we want to be mindful of. Ever since I've been in my role, I have made it a point to try to be sure every product in Sugarbeet is re-registered. We don't have enough products to be giving away registrations. So I want to ensure that we can keep acetochlor in sugar beets approved. Now, the first question you might ask is, why is MDA out looking for trouble? Why are they out sampling fields or sampling watersheds? And sampling is a condition of the regulatory approval process. So there are two different statutes that indicate that monitoring is part of the regulatory approval process. So it's interesting, where they're seeing these spikes in levels is after spring rainfall events, especially heavy rainfall events. And you can see how the data is concentrated during May and June. On the bar on the right, if on the axis to your left is discharge rate. So it's when we're having that spring runoff and when we're getting rain events, that's when they're finding acetochlor in some of the surface water. Now, when we get those same rain events in August, you know, there isn't any runoff that's occurring, and there's no detection that's found. So their best management practices really align very well to what sugar beet growers are already doing. We're using post-emergence application. We're using a suite of all of the chloroacetamide herbicides. We're not just using one. And because of crop safety, we're not using the product pre-emergence. So I think what we're doing in sugar beets is exactly what the MDA best practices are asking for. I'm not here to talk about other crops, especially corn, and I think maybe that's what's pushing it into this danger area is applications in corn, especially after some of the heavier rain events. So Sarah from Bears here. Sarah, have I discussed this properly, or is there anything I need to add from the Bear perspective? Sarah, can you stand up and make sure everybody can hear you? Yes.
So we can look at these issues, if you see this, if the MPA is detecting, and there's a lot of concern that there's going to be some additional restrictions not currently.
Yeah.
That's the biggest.
Thank you for that. Next topic, Palmer amaranth. My former colleague at NDSU just calls it Satan. This isn't a North Dakota picture. This happens to be from Iowa. But I will tell you, from the North Dakota experiment, I am so impressed by how strongly Palmer amaranth can root into the soil. So somebody was talking earlier about pulling water hemp. And I'll be honest with you, I don't mind pulling a few water hemp. You know, they pull pretty good, especially when the soil is moist. Palmer amaranth does not pull very good at all. It's a good way to hurt yourself, quite frankly. So anyway, the board has been asking repeatedly, Peters, you need to do a Palmer amaranth experiment. So a few years ago, we did do one. We did it out in Nebraska, and we had good results there. But their soils are different, their environment's different, so there was a necessity to do the experiment here. So the second reason why this is important is we continue to find Palmer amaranth in Minnesota. Now, I believe MDA has done an outstanding job here. They've been extremely proactive. But that stated, we continue to have new occurrences. It's like that whack-a-mole game. When you whack the one down in Redwood County, a new one pops up. And the latest two are Morrison County, which is north of Stearns County, so it's north and east, so it's outside of the sugar beet area. And then in the south in Steele County. Those are new counties. Those are new outbreaks of Palmer amaranth. They've also found additional Palmer amaranth in Todd and Douglas County. So we do have sugar beet fields in Douglas County. I don't know where they are in proximity, but certainly that's an important one. Douglas County and Todd County, as I mentioned, are not new counties. We've had Palmer amaranth there before. The other one that we're struggling with, and this has been a work in progress, is Polk County. Think of Crookston, Minnesota. So some screenings from some of these sunflower facilities were dumped at a site in Polk County, and we have had a very difficult time eradicating those populations. So that's still an active site. So if you look at all the data, there's been 44 confirmed sites since 2016, or since we first found Palmer amaranth in Minnesota. Now, there's been examples where it's identified as a contaminant, let's say in a forage grass, and they know that those forages have been sold to a grower, and they've gone to those places but not found it in the fields. So that's what the 77 means. It means that it could have been there by virtue of a transaction that was made, but it hasn't been found there. I was visiting at lunch with a group of gentlemen, and they were so impressed by how aggressive MDA takes to this. They go out there with a lot of artillery. They're out there with fire, they're out there with machines. You know, they're very aggressive when they identify Palmer amaranth on a field. I think I lost a slide here. Just go back one. Oh, maybe not. So I just want to kind of summarize what's happened a little bit. There's been 44 sites in Minnesota over the years where we found Palmer amaranth, still managing it in 7 sites in 7 counties. And when they don't find Palmer amaranth for 3 years, it's called eradicated. And I'll use Redwood County as an example. Once it's gone, once it's not found anymore, it comes off the map. So the question is, well, how is it getting there in the first place? And MDA likes to talk about pathways. And there's 3 or 4 pathways, I think, that you have to see and hear about. So the first one is it's often a contaminant in grass seed. So you're saying, well, wait a minute. I thought Minnesota tested all the new seeds that came into the state. And they do. But sometimes the results of testing don't come back before transactions are made. In other cases, their testing, or at least their first round of testing, doesn't find the Palmer amaranth. So contamination in seeds, especially millet seed, is probably number 1. Number 2, we've had this problem with screenings. So a lot of sunflowers are brought into the state of North Dakota. North Dakota can't grow enough sunflowers to meet the demands of the processing facilities. So they bring them in from places like Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, places where there are Palmer amaranth. And unfortunately, they sell the screenings to cattlemen. And cattlemen are using them as a supplement. And we're introducing them into places that way. I think we've largely got that one under control. And then finally, the last one, you know, sometimes in these specialty feeds or even in bird feed, there can be Palmer amaranth. And we've had an introduction. We were evaluating an example in Clay County from introduction from that method. So let's get to the experiment. So this was at a location west of Valley City, North Dakota. Clearly not in the Sugarbeet area, clearly outside of our area. So this was an example of one of those sites where the cattleman bought these screenings, fed it to his herd, put the manure out in the field, and quite frankly, really didn't identify the weed growing out there as Palmer amaranth. Somebody else had to do that. So I did an experiment last year. So I call this a factorial experiment. 2 factors, pre-emergence herbicides and then post-emergence herbicides. So 4 pre-emergence treatments. The first being none at all, Nortron plus dual magnum, so the same program that a lot of you use. Nortron plus Torero, so using that product that they're using out in Western Sugar, and then a high rate of Nortron. So that was the pre-emergence factor. The post-emergence factor was Roundup, 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 just a Roundup alone program, a 2 lay-by program, and a 3 lay-by program. So one other thing. My colleague at NDSU said, you know, Peters, don't get in a hurry. This Palmer doesn't come in as early as other weeds. So we didn't start this experiment until the 1st of June. So the pre-emergence products went out the same day we planted. We put our first post-emergence, our 2 leaf stage post-emergence application out on June 17th. And you can see the other dates. So this is, I came back on the 25th of June. So this is about 2 weeks after I made a broadcast application in addition to the pre-emergence applications. So there were a lot of other, quote, nuisance weeds out there. There was some grass, there was some common lamb's quarters, there was some red root pigweed. I wasn't interested in any of that, and I wanted to get rid of it. So I did a broadcast glyphosate application. Came back, and this is what I saw. There's no weeds. What did I do? Did I wreck this experiment before I started? Well, I'll show you the picture in another slide or so. I didn't wreck the experiment. So let's look at the results here. So again, this is factor A. So what's nested or embedded in that untreated result is the Roundup only applications, the 2 lay-by and the 3 lay-by. So that's a high value because of the contribution from those other numbers. And then you can see the other pre-emergence herbicides. So what the data says is, you know, those pre-treatments really didn't matter. They were all kind of the same. Similar weed control on the 45 to 52 days, similar weed control 59 to 69 days. I gave it a score just visually. How bad is it? Is it very bad? Is it bad or not too bad at all? And then I counted the weeds that were within rows 3 and 4. So anyway, pre-emergence didn't really teach us a whole lot on that one. What we learned is about the post-emergence treatments. So if you go all the way to the bottom, that 3 lay-by program was our best program. So just like I mentioned, it would have been that 3 lay-by program averaged across all of those pre-emergence treatments that are on the top. So to me, that's the way I would approach this if we had an incidence of Palmer amaranth in our area. We would jump right away to that pre-3 lay-by program. So this is the way of the weeds. You know, I told you there was nothing there on the 25th of June. A month later, we've got waist-high Palmer amaranth. A month later. So what we did is we put some flags out. And this is only a few days, 5 days on the left after we put the flags in, and it's 2 weeks later on the right. It's amazing to me how fast a weed can grow. But that's what we learned about Palmer amaranth. Now, we made a mistake in the application, and this is on me. In one of the treatments, we accidentally used Ultra Blazer. And to our surprise, it was pretty effective on this biotype of Palmer amaranth. So who knows, down the road, if and when we need to do this, that might be part of our program that we have. So this part deserves some summaries, so I want to just go through this with you in a little more detail. So the first thing I want to say is Palmer amaranth germinates and emerges later. So I always say water hemp is the 15th of May. I don't expect to see any Palmer amaranth in our area, assuming all the biotypes are the same, until the 15th of June. I believe the post part of our program is the most important part. We're certainly going to use the pre-program, but the post part, especially the 3 lay-by part, is the part I think is going to be a better approach. Ultra Blazer, we're going to have to take a look at that. Maybe we need to incorporate that as well into the program. Number 4 or 5, all of those things that we talk about to get good stands are really helpful in this case. So narrow rows and also planting on time and good stands. Now back to that picture, you might have noticed those were 30-inch rows. There was no way I was going to drag my planter out to that place and then come to one of your fields. So I let somebody else plant it, and he just happened to have a 30-inch spacing. The last thing, and I think this is the sobering part, that stated we didn't get any more than 70% control. And I think that's the sobering part of this, is we don't have a real good arsenal of products yet that are going to control Palmer when it comes to our area, if it comes to our area. I want to talk a little bit about adjuvants and then complex mixtures. So I want to start this by something that I heard a friend say a while back. So he said that leaves don't drink rocks. So what he's saying is when a herbicide crystallizes on a leaf, it doesn't get into a leaf. And that's what the value of adjuvants are. Adjuvants enable herbicides to get into leaves. And one example of that is they reduce the surface tension. They flatten these droplets out so there's more surface area on the leaf so that they can get in. Adjuvants have been an important part of our recommendations. We recommend non-ionic surfactants, methylated seed oil. You've heard me talk a lot about HSMOCs. I looked at a new one this year, and I'm going to talk about that in a couple of slides. Why is this important? Well, Dave alluded to this in his presentation. There's a lot of times when we mix things together. I call it complex mixtures. And I think I've shared this data before, so we'll go through it rather quickly. When you mix Roundup and Etho together, it's safe. You mix Roundup, Etho, and a chlorocetamide herbicide and apply it at the 2-leaf stage, it's safe. Now you add an insecticide, it's a cold, wet spring, and you want to add something, you start to see a little injury. So James Rademacher, James, a few years ago, it was cold and wet, maybe 10 years ago, and we were talking a little bit about needing to make an insecticide application with our lay-by program, and we decided to use split rates. Instead of using 18 or 21 ounces, we went to 12 and 12. And we've done that now for all of our chlorocetamide herbicides, and that's been a way that we've used to increase safety, especially when you need to add an insecticide. Add Stinger, and the combination of Lorsban Stinger with the chlorocetamide herbicide, glyphosate and etho, in my opinion, is too much. And you're asking for the potential for injury. At the end of the year, it doesn't look so bad. The fresh weights were okay, but there's still the potential for injury from that treatment. So I believe a lot of that injury is attributed to the adjuvant system. And one of the things that we've done is when you're doing those complex mixtures, maybe it's time to back off on the adjuvants. All of those products that are in the mixture contain adjuvants, product adjuvants. And then if you add more into it, I think you're just opening the opportunity for injury. So one of the easiest ways we've come at to reduce the potential for injury is just to keep the adjuvant out altogether. So that takes me to taloamine. So 2 years ago, I had a situation where an agriculturalist called, and this was up in kochia country. And he said, we've got kochia and we can't control it. What do you think? So I said, let's use the maximum glyphosate rate, let's use ammonium sulfate, let's put non-ionic surfactant in, and let's no other herbicides, and let's spray at under 10 gallons. You know, the old best practices for using glyphosate. So he said, you know, my retailer's talking about this product called Level Best. How about if we use that? So we did. So in the meantime, I was trying to figure out, well, what is Level Best? And what we found out, it was the adjuvant system that was in the original Roundup. By the way, I have a lot of history with this. And it was the best, in my opinion, adjuvant system that was developed for glyphosate. It was taken out of the jug because the taloamine adjuvants were eye irritants. And the leadership at Monsanto said, our flagship product isn't going to have a caution signal word. You know, we don't want an elevated risk with our most important product. So people started looking at different adjuvants. And I would argue for 20 years they've been looking for different adjuvants since that's happened. This taloamine system was a very effective adjuvant system. So we did some work in the greenhouse. Kochia, Roundup with nothing else in, just the formulated adjuvant, prefer 90 at the recommended use. I got the wrong slide here, unfortunately. This one here should be Level Best at 0.25%, and then Level Best at 0.5%. So you can see the benefit of this adjuvant was amazing. And in full disclosure, these weren't at full Roundup rates. We backed off on the Roundup in order to show the differences in adjuvants. But anyway, it made a believer out of me. So I'm wondering now, maybe we need to reevaluate what we do in the rest of our program. And one of the things we're going to do is to see how these taloamine products work on water hemp. So hopefully before spring we'll have those results, and I can share that with you through the agriculturalist. So we took it to the field, the same treatments, and it worked. I'll be right there. It worked good. It didn't work quite as good, but I'll tell you the farmers that used it were very satisfied with the results that they had. So anyway, one of the things I think there was a difference in temperatures. It was a cool season this year, and I don't think the taloamines worked as well in the cool weather as compared to our greenhouse conditions. Dr. Metzger.
Did you do any work with this taloamine, Roundup, and 4 ounces of Nortron added in?
Okay, so Mike is asking if I put in any Nortron with the glyphosate, taloamine. Did I say ammonium sulfate too? Okay, no, I did not.
Think it would work?
I think I need to try that. I think I'll do that, Mike. I think that's a good suggestion. Okay. What's next? I want to come back to ethyl. I think we're getting close to the end. I want to go back to this whole business about incorporating ethyl. This conversation would be a lot easier if somebody would tell me if it's going to rain or not. Okay? And I'm doing that with data. So this is from 2024. I've got two slides. The first one's kochia, the second one's going to be pigweed. So the orange bars are incorporation. The lightest one is 4 pints. The heaviest orange is 7.5 pints. And the same with green. The lightest is pre-emergence at 4 pints. The heaviest one is 7.5. So you can discount the 4. Didn't matter if it was incorporated or if it was left on the surface. 4 is not enough to get kochia. The interesting data is what happens at 6 and 7.5. And what it's saying with kochia is if you can count on Mother Nature, don't incorporate it. Mother Nature can do a better job of incorporating ethyl into the soil than you can with your equipment, or I can with my equipment. So that was kochia. And we saw the same thing with red pigweed. So this all falls on you. You know, you've got to decide. I will tell you, if it doesn't rain, you don't get anything with ethyl. That's the frustrating part with ethyl, because it's still hanging on the soil. But I feel pretty confident in saying that none of you can incorporate ethyl as well as Mother Nature can. And that's the challenge that we have as decision makers. So what would I do? I'd probably incorporate it too, but I want you to see the results, that if you can count on rain occurring, leaving it on the surface is a good way of controlling weeds with ethyl. Okay, so this gets into a conversation that we were having. If we're going to be incorporating something, are we incorporating the best product? Or do we need to dig back into the vault and look at Eptam and Ronid? So it's a project David and I have been working on. And it's kind of interesting. The blue bars are 28 days. So if you rely on 28 days, the data says the ethyl is the best. But ethyl is a racehorse that fades a little bit. I told you that it's a 35-day product. It's a 5-week product. So you can see that as compared to Ronid and Eptam, it kind of faded back a little bit in the end. Now, David would say, yeah, but don't forget to tell them that the Ronid-Eptam treatment was a treatment of both the Ronid alone and the Eptam alone treatment. So we had more herbicide in that treatment as well. And that's an important point that we have to point out. We had a very high quality experiment. Brett Peterson, thank you for allowing us to collaborate with you. I have a rule of thumb with yield trials. If we can't measure a 1.5 ton difference in the experiment, it's noisy data. We were clearly under that threshold with this experiment. Same with sugar. If you can't measure 0.4% sugar, you've got a lousy experiment. So I'm real happy with the results of that, and you'll see that in the next slide. So what did we see? Well, the first 2 lines are the soil residual herbicides alone. Then the third line is that lay-by treatment, and then it's a combination of the pre and the lay-by. And you can see the most injury was with that combination treatment, especially Eptam. And I think we know that. We've seen enough EPTAM data that we know that EPTAM can be a little hotter on sugar beets. And it's certainly the case in this data set. Interesting, when we went to yield, we didn't see any differences. And again, I told you this was a high-quality experiment. So we pulled 3 sites together and left the 4th site alone because it was planted a little bit later. But there's absolutely no differences that we saw in this. So this is something we're going to keep working on. We did some fall work, which I'm going to share with you on the next slide. We did dual magnum, etho, and EPTAM all in the fall at multiple locations to investigate this a little further. So I'm interested in what that combination is. What the combination maybe of a fall application is combined with our spring lay-by program. And again, all of this is about ensuring that we get that good early season water hemp control that sometimes eludes us when it doesn't rain. Okay, just a couple of slides left and then I'm done. Spin-Aid is not a new herbicide. Unfortunately, I never work with anything that's new. So Spin-Aid is from the 1970s. We used to call it fenmetifam, and it was part of desmetifam plus fenmetifam, or Betamix. So fenmetifam is the kochia, common ragweed, lamb's quarters part of that mixture. So we have a lot of challenges right now with kochia. And we got to do something. Most of this kochia is a glyphosate-resistant biotype. So we've gone back to the closet and resurrected fenmetifam as a way of solving our problem. So anyway, years ago, fenmetifam was applied at very high rates. So when I first started with Dr. Dexter, he talked about bringing sugar beet to the brink of death. And that was because they were using batenol at 6 pints per acre. And you can see the kind of injury. This wasn't 6 pints at all, but it's the necrosis, especially on the older leaves. So we don't want to do those rates anymore. What we are interested in is 2 things. We want small kochia, and we're using repeat applications. We're using the old micro-rate program concept to control kochia. So the third ingredient here is the temperature, the daytime temperature of when we make the application is important. So 3 things we're tracking. We're tracking the sugar beet size, the size of the kochia, and then what are the weather conditions on the day of application. When it's hotter out, we know that we're going to need to be careful, maybe delay until the afternoon. If we're adding stinger in, we may have to consider the adjuvant system. Mike, we are always using etho in combination with fenmetifam, just as we would recommend with Betamix. So we've come up with a program that we're using. We have a 3, maybe a 4 application approach. Our rate is dependent on the air temperature, the size of the sugar beets, and then if we're applying other products in combination with Spin-Aid. And again, this is the strategy that we'll be using for kochia. Now, we're also looking at it for common ragweed. I don't see Spin-Aid as a standalone approach on ragweed. We're going to look at, and we have done this, we're looking at mixing stinger with Spin-Aid for common ragweed control. So that takes us to the end. Like the others, I need to thank you. Thank you for funding our research. Thank our board members. Is Brian still here? Brian's still here. You know, last year I was going to acknowledge Lane and he was out fishing. Guess where Lane is today? He's out fishing again. The Southern Men team, I can't say enough about the collaboration that my program has with them, especially David Metler. He's done a tremendous job to support my program. And then our cooperators. So this year, Peterson Farms and also Young Krantz Brothers were collaborating. The last thing, and not the least thing, is I want you to contact me if you have any questions. I told my wife, if I lose my cell phone, I lose 500 grower names. Help me to not lose my cell phone. If you need me, I'm here to help you. Send me a text, give me a call. Probably shouldn't email me. I'm not so good at email. Do we have any time for any questions?
Yeah, you do. Yep.
I'd love to take some questions if anybody wants to talk about something. Go ahead, Chris.
On your F10 trials, did you incorporate that like one or two?
Okay, excellent question. So Chris asked, should EPTAM and Ronit be one pass or two? So we recently talked to the folks at Gowan, and they said one pass. One pass is what we're recommending, but use the EPTAM incorporation rules, meaning set your equipment at 4 inches so you'll get it in the top 2 inches. Now, since you brought that up, we tried to consider EPTAM and etho, and the incorporation rules for etho are very different. So we kept them separate, where we would incorporate the EPTAM one way and incorporate the etho the other way. I want to keep etho on the surface 1 inch. So that's a little different. Does that help? One pass, one pass. Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? In the back, Mr. Les, Mr. Plumley. So you're going to have to talk louder, Les, because I have selective hearing. Excuse me? Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So Les is comparing water hemp to Palmer amaranth. They are the same, Les, in they're both dioecious pigweed, meaning male and female plants. They're different in that Palmer has a lot more aggressive growth habit. The biotype, like I mentioned, the biotype I saw germinated and emerged later. And I would also add, it likes it to be drier than water hemp. So, to be honest with you, I think we're going to have to deal longer term with water hemp than Palmer amaranth, just by those environmental conditions alone. The last point is, can we hold it back with our canopy? I don't know. I think that's an excellent question. I don't know if a strong canopy will hold it back or not. I kind of think that it will. If we could, come close to closing rows, I don't know that there'd be enough light to get it to germinate and emerge. I think that might be one of our better strategies, quite frankly. Does that help? Anybody else? Anybody else before I turn it back to Jerry? Thank you for having me.